All right, the first time for something a little different on Built to Last podcast. So you're going to hear a solo voice, and this is my very first solo podcast. So, man, I'm not going to lie, I am a little nervous. And as I was sort of preparing for this, I'm like, how many other times in my life have I been nervous? And I remember learning along the way that physiologically, and I can feel what's happening in my body right now, physiologically, the similarities between being nervous and being excited are absolutely identical. So when you're nervous, you get a dryness in your mouth, your pupils dilate, your heart starts to beat. You can feel this tingle in your fingers, that butterflies in your belly. And what happens when you're excited? Exactly the same thing. So what is the difference? The difference really is just the story that we tell ourselves in our head. And, I think about, two kids in the queue at Movie World. They're about to go on a big ride, and one kid's sitting there, same ride, going, I'm excited. Another kid's going, oh my God, I'm so scared, I'm nervous. Exactly the same set of circumstances. The difference is that story. So for me, that's come up a lot, whether it was when I started, many times, right? I think the first time that I pushed through that, actually before I start that. So I feel like, that story, when it came to public speaking, was, that I'm not doing it for me, I'm doing it for them. And that just was a way of sort of taking the pressure off, which is what I'm trying to tell myself right now. So I know that once I get past this nerves, the flow will happen. So bear with me, and I promise you it'll be worth it. But let's start about that story, right? Like, if we know the difference between nerves and excitement is a story, well, where did that story come from? A lot of that came from our childhood, right? It was the experiences that we had as kids. It was the knowledge that we took on from our parents, from our teachers. And along the way, all of that becomes our belief systems. And, what we believe is it's fact regardless. And so, being able to first recognize that, okay, one, if this is my story, then perhaps I should choose what I want that story to be. The second thing is, I want you to ask yourself, and I constantly ask myself this, but the first question I want you to ask is, that voice in your head, that one that you can hear when you think that you're thinking, or when you've got your eyes closed in bed or whatever, the first question is that voice in your head you? Is that you speaking? And I wish that I was in the same room or car with you to hear what your answer is. But the truth is, that voice isn't you. Because if that voice was you, then who's listening? And I want you to really pay attention to that, because half of the things that we say, that story in our head that we continue to tell ourselves, that, I can't do the thing, or I shouldn't, or what if, and judgment and fear and all the rest of it. And I will share plenty of stories of how that's definitely been, part of my story, as with everyone. And it's like, well, is that really how I want to think? And is that really the story that I want to be telling myself? Or is that just constructed from all of my beliefs that I've learned along the way? And so the first thing is, not to get too psychological on you, but in positive psychology, they do talk about giving that voice in your head a name, and understanding that that is a separate entity to you, albeit that it is built on your subconsciousness, because it is everything that you've learned. But understand that there are times when you are directing it, and there are times where it is running on autopilot, majority of the time, and it is directing the fuck out of what you think, feel, act, or don't act. So give it a name. And then when you hear yourself thinking and it's directing your thoughts, speak out loud and just ask yourself, is this thought serving me or is it sabotaging me? And then sometimes, and I get it, that there's certain rooms and environments where you can't really just talk out loud. But the more that you can actually speak out loud about what you actually want to think, what you want your story to be, that then is you consciously controlling this autopilot voice in your head. You know, straight up, if I showed you my notes, that is not at all how I thought that this was going to start. But if I think of, like some of the things that really directed my thoughts, and I know that lots of people are going to relate to this, is fear. For me, the three biggest things would have been fear, lack of confidence, and I'll get into the next one next. But if I think about fear, like I still to this current day have a fear of heights. I have many fears, fear of judgment and things like that, but fear of heights. And I remember I was 16 years old. I was on a holiday with my family over Christmas, and we're on the Gold Coast. And there was a big bungee jump. Well, it was big at the time anyway, in the middle of Cavalav or just behind it. And I said, I think I want to go bungee jumping. And everyone knows that I'm scared of heights. They know that I'm a bit of a daredevil, or back then, but I was scared of heights. And I remember, anyway, long story short, after lots of debate between me, mum and dad, because they definitely did not want me to go bungee jumping, I remember standing on the top and I was shitting myself, man. To say that that the fear wasn't real would be an absolute understatement. And that paralysis, but you're in this situation, you're at the top of this crane, you've got these, very encouraging, dudes at the top, and they're saying, just shuffle your way to the edge. The weight goes over the edge and you can feel it and you're hanging onto these bars like for dear life. And then out of nowhere, they give you the instruction. It's going to be 3, 2, 1 bungee, and then you jump. And so I'm like, I remember thinking to myself, are you going to do it? And I'd put myself in this position. And now the question is, are you going to step up to the plate? So anyway, long story short, 3, 2, 1 bungee, and I jump. And I can honestly say, I can think about that moment so vividly where I was basically horizontal and the world fucking stopped for what felt like 10 seconds, but, or maybe a lifetime. And then it happened. And, the rush, the endorphins, the fear, all of that excitement, finally get back onto, solid ground. And every cell in my body was absolutely lit up. And I didn't know it at the time, but like now what I call that being alive. Like every fiber, every cell, every scent, every bit of focus was on that moment. And that was living. And yeah, I can say that back then I didn't really internalize it as that, but it was something that I knew I wanted more of. But if we're thinking about how do we face fears, how do we build confidence? Because the first things in our brain that are going to dictate are all the reasons why you shouldn't, why we should play safe. And so I didn't realize I was doing it then, but I was putting myself in situations where, all that was left was action. And it would either be you'd get yourself to the line and you either would do it or you wouldn't do it. But and I think of other times where I, sort of so for me as a kid growing up, 16, I told you in the last episode, I had long hair below my nipple, looked like one of the Hanson brothers. My younger brother said, he goes, you actually didn't look like one of the Hanson brothers. You had brunette hair. He goes, you looked more like Bon Jovi. But anyway, I felt as undesirable as a Hanson. And so therefore, as a young guy, skinny and all the rest of it, I knew that I was attracted to, plenty of women, but I wasn't really feeling the same, that same feeling in return. So like avoiding rejection became a massive thing for me. And so I wouldn't put myself in situations where I'd get rejected either by, chicks when I was trying to, like, I wouldn't try to pick them up because if they said no, that would just absolutely damage my my self-belief, which is ultimately what this episode is about. How long are we in? But that's what this is about. It's how do we build self-belief when we don't have it? Some people I feel are really, I admire them that they have that out of the box self-belief. I do feel that there is a massive aspect which I probably took on in my mid-20s where it was sort of a fake it till you make it kind of self-belief. But in my teenage years and early 20s, mid-20s, yeah, it was rocked by the fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of rejection. So I would do like my story in my head was avoidance and people pleasing. And like, I can honestly say that I didn't really put myself so much, I'll say, in harm's way to feel any of those things. But then I started to rise to the occasion, not so much knowing at the time, but that's when I did the bungee jump. And yeah, I got into car sales of all industries, which is, I don't know if it's the height, but certainly it has got to be up there in terms of facing rejection and facing constant failure, people saying no, you putting work in, falling short, not hitting target. And all of those experiences, end up like allowing me to rebuild my confidence and self-belief. And I'm a big believer in, well, as I've, come to learn, the power of words. And I really get excited by the origin of where words came from. So confidence, the Latin translation or the root word of confidence is confidia, which translates as intense trust. So to build confidence means that we need to build intense trust in who? In ourselves. How do we build intense trust in ourselves? It is by doing what we say we will do. It is, going from thinking into action. And I see it with the clients that I obviously work with today. But, even throughout my leadership and management roles, getting people through that stage of thinking that they want to do something and putting it into action and really being able to, what's the word I'm looking for? Have a more positive and constructive relationship with failure is one of the most fundamental things that we can build in ourselves. Because like I said, I really didn't fail in my career until I went for the first assistant manager role where I didn't get it. Every other failure, like, yes, I was in sales, and so you go for target, and sometimes in the early stages you wouldn't get it. And so, yes, that is experiencing failure, and how do we rebuild from that? But I was in sales, so yeah, I didn't really associate it with that. But how often, and I know in my teenage and in my 20s, I would avoid putting myself in situations because my relationship with failure was not positive. It was not constructive. My identity was based on the outcome, not on the action. And fuck, man, like if I'm not drilling that information into, my clients or anybody that I speak to, because that's probably one of the most powerful things that I've come to learn about myself is, and I know that society does it, we put our confidence on the success, not on the efforts, the attempts, the actions. But that's where it's got to be. So like I don't know where I learned it, but one of my like little screensavers on my phone is, and if you've done a workshop with me, you'll hear it. It is, I am absolutely outcome driven, but I am process focused, because it is the process that, you will win or learn and continue to, fail upwards until you nail it, and then the outcome will go. So I have absolutely insane clarity, like as a salesperson, what my target was. As a coach, I've got the exact same clarity. Like, I do want to speak on stages. That's the vision, but am I there yet? No. So what are the actions, behaviors that I can put into place now that will evolve me to get there? I work with salespeople and leaders. And it's, like, we've got to move from, yes, be focused on the outcome or be driven by the outcome, but be focused on the process. Being able to get out of our heads, because what really holds us back in our expression to like really show up as that best version of us is some of the inhibitions that we're still holding on to from that we got bashed out of us, hopefully not literally, but, metaphorically speaking, when we were kids and, speaking up in class and all the rest of it. And then, parents, teachers, people just putting you in this box. And then now we're as adults and we're trying to find our rhythm and being able to express ourselves. But there is still that layer of fear of failure, fear of judgment from others, fear of, being seen, fear of, showing up. And it's like, well, if we don't focus on the outcome, but we focus on those actions, that's when you're going to start to build the confidence, intense trust in who? In you. How do we do it? By showing up 1% every single day. And I feel like, the greatest gift that we could give ourselves or each other, more ourselves, is self-belief. And I was thinking about it. I wonder, can you remember who believed in you outside of the family dynamic? Because obviously mum and dad believe in you, hopefully. And maybe there were, sports coaches or, other mentors along the way that would have said, yeah, you go get them. I believe in you. You can be anything. But it's not really until we get out of that safety cell of our childhood and we get out into adult world where we're like, fuck, I've got to sort of try and build this self-belief on my own. And sometimes, but I remember, like it was yesterday, I would have been 22 years old, 21 at the oldest, but 22 years old. And I was working at a dealership, and one of the senior leaders in the business, his name's Don Fordonis, happy to name him. We were outside and crossed paths, and it was so like unscripted and unprompted. And he said to me, he said to me, he goes, Adrian, you're destined for bigger things. And I'm like this, actually I wasn't 22, that's a lie, I would have been 24. I'd started to get good and make a name for myself in the business. But I know that I saw myself initially as maybe I am bigger than just a car salesperson, but did I believe it? Honestly, no, I didn't. And then he said that, and I just remember, like, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. And it was the first time outside of my home that I'd had someone say, like, essentially, like, I believe in you. And what that did to power me up was, like, incredible. It took me a long time to take the step beyond that. But, I feel like sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves for timeline when it should happen, but take that pressure off and it happens when it happens, because that's when it's going to happen. But I actually had I was grateful to have the opportunity to cross paths with him just last year. And I pulled him aside and I said, hey man, do you realize that you said something to me when I was younger? And he looked at me, I was looking at him in the eyes, and he looked straight at me, and he knew exactly what I was talking about, the exact moment that it happened. And for me, that just solidified it, because the gap between that would have been the best part of 20 years gap. And he fucking knew exactly that same moment and what he gave to me. And it was the greatest gift. And I feel like in the work that I do today, and obviously, sort of leading up to it in my management and leadership positions, it is that gift that I try to give back to other people, is that self-belief, is the confidence that their potential is unknowable. And I did a post about this because, like what is possible? Everything is possible, but what gets in our way is our fears, our judgments, our self-doubt, our lack of confidence, our lack of self-trust, our lack of self-belief. And so, when I'm working with 22-year-olds and I'm, trying to build their self-belief, or leaders in their 40s and 50s and beyond, and you can still see that there are people that have been holding on to these masks for a long time. It is truly about building that self-confidence, that intuition, so that they can express themselves as they truly want. And, for some people, that doubt, of, well, how do I think about my potential if I don't see what it is that I want to become? And I relate to that a lot because, I feel like, particularly as young, just young humans, this isn't even men or women gender biased, but we think about, when we're kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's always a work identity. And then we get into our high school years and we've got to choose a uni course or choose a career path. And it's always about, what do you want to be when you grow up? And even though I did the accounting degree and evidently not an accountant, it was because I chose a what, and it really didn't align with it. I didn't feel right. And so for a big part of my 20s, it's what do I want to be? What do I want to be? And when I didn't have that answer, it caused a lot of frustration, a lot of lack of drive, because it's like, well, what am I working towards if I don't know what I want to become? And, it's like, what's my why and all the rest of it? And that was when I shifted gears, because I feel it's hard to go for, if you don't know what you want to become. I shifted gears and went into, well, who do I want to become? Not from a title or a career industry, but what sort of characteristics, what sort of values do I want to stand for? What do I want people to say about me? And not in a, because external judgment validates me, but if this is my opportunity to tell my story, not have an autopilot story, in my head, what story do I want to tell, and what story do I want people to say about me? Well, that now is in my control, and that gave me clarity on what I can work towards. Evidently, obviously, I worked out career and all the rest of it along the way, but I had a really powerful exercise that I experienced when I was 33 years old, and I really want to do it now, but it was a visualization exercise. And I'm not going to do it because I know that some of you might be in your office, some of you might be on a train, some of you might be driving. And so to ask you to close your eyes is probably not safe, and I'm not sure my insurance will cover it. But it was essentially, it was a visualization that allows you to think about not to be morbid, but your death, your end of life. And the Stoics, I've done a lot of research on Stoic philosophy, and one of the things that they really lean in on is being comfortable with your death, but not in a like, I'm a warrior, I'm happy to be sacrificed. More so, if you think about your end of days in a way of, how does that allow you to show up today? How would you express yourself? How would you not waste moments? What would you do? What would you say? Like that sort of interpretation of death as a way of not of thinking about the end, but thinking about the living. And, we've all heard those cliches of everybody dies, but not everybody lives. And so when I get, I have clarity, and this is something that I encourage everybody to have, is think about that 85-year-old version of you, God willing, right? What decisions does he or she want you to make right now to live and express yourself at your best, so that when you get to that ripe age, you're not looking back going, you're going, I fucking did it. I closed the gap as much as I could. And that's it, right? Like, if we think about the gap between who we are and who we're capable of becoming, and that's being our potential, that gap, I mean, aside from all of the other, skills and attributes, that's going to come down to our self-belief. So whatever we can do on a day-to-day basis, micro moments, right, to face the fear or put yourself in positions where all that's left is action, and then you do what you say you will do. And this is this is as simple as, I'm going to go to the gym on Monday. And when you don't go to the gym on Monday, you're solidifying distrust. But when you say, I'm going to go to the gym on Monday, and you go to the gym, and even if it was just for 10 minutes, you're showing up and you're building that little self-confidence. When you go and you say, I'm going to ask for that pay rise, I'm going to, put in my application from that promotion, I'm going to go and say hello to that girl or guy. And whether you get it, you have a good experience or a bad experience, win or learn, you're showing up for yourself. And, if I could overlap all of that just with progress over perfection, because we put way too much pressure on ourselves that it's got to be perfect. No, it's just got to be progress. And even if it's, the most micro step forward, acknowledge it and just ask yourself, would I have done this? Would I have done this yesterday? Would I have done this last week? Would I have done this last year? And most of the time, the answer is going to be to that is no. And if today you did, acknowledge that. That's fucking powerful. And I think that the last thing that I'd say, how much time have we been going for? Goodness me, brother can talk. I've said at the start, remember that voice in your head isn't yours, and it's not. It truly isn't, right? So just remember, if it's the one talking, it's not you, because you're the one who's listening. So whilst you're going through this stage of building confidence, building self-trust, and you are inevitably going to slip up and fall over along the way, rather than kicking the shit out of yourself, I want you to, when you hear that voice in your head being so critical, so savage, negative, and sabotaging, I want you to ask yourself, what would I say to the person who I love the most if they were going through exactly what I'm going through right now? And if you can feel that softness in your heart when you go, oh my God, there is no way that I would say what I'm saying to myself to them, that is called compassion. It is called common humanity. So what I want you to do is I want you to speak out loud. And whether you're visualizing yourself, I want you to picture that person that you love that's going through that. And I want you to say to them, what would you say to them? And the reason you need to say it out loud is because the closest ears to your lips are your own. And you need to fucking hear that love, that positivity, that encouragement. I get, that there is negative drivers that get people across the line. It is a kind of fuel, but it is not a positive fuel, and it is not a sustainable fuel. So if you can give yourself that gift of compassion and of love, what is going to put you in the best frame of mind to go and do that very same thing again? Is it because you've beaten the shit out of yourself, or is it because you've given yourself some self-love and self-compassion? I think about high-performing athletes, the diver in the Olympics that's done this dive 15,000 times, and they've gone up to the blocks and they've done their dive, and they didn't do perfect. When they go back up in 20 minutes time, because they're about to do the exact same action again, have they beaten the shit out of themselves? to then get back up to that top step and they think that they're going to perform at their best? Or are they giving themselves kindness? Are they thinking about how could they do this better? How could they show up at their best? Not with negativity and with force, but with repetition and with love. So I think that's enough from me today. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely love talking about this. To me, it's, I feel, like I said before, the greatest gift that we can give is self-belief. And I feel that it was something that I deeply was chasing for myself, which is now why I actively seek to give it. So I hope this helps you in your day, and whether it's for you personally or help you start to build that within your families and in your teams. A candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. So with that, as they say, you always remember your first. So thank you for being part of my first solo podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please, share it with someone who you feel needs to hear this. If you can, we haven't had any comments, man. Give us some comments. If there's something that you want us to lean into, or if there's a story that you related to the most, or you want to, you want us to talk about, please. We're really building this to last, and for that to be on solid foundations, as much as it's about what we want to share, it is about, what you guys want to hear. So thanks again, and appreciate you. Have an awesome day.